Today we're going to explain Affinity start to finish. Some of you may already know how this works. Some of you may know partially how it works. And some of you may be experts at this. Stick around, see if you learn something new. And if you do, give the video a like, a sub, a follow. Whatever you can do would be fantastic. It helps support the channel. So here we go. Umamusume Affinity is how you create parents to help raise your Umas. So when you first start a career with an Umamusume, you are prompted to select 2 parents. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's take a look at Silent Suzuka. So this is what your screen is going to look like when you're first starting your career with an Uma. You get to select 2 legacies. If you want to sort these legacies by affinity, you're going to click Affinity Bonus on this screen. So you'll come down here and maybe yours will be on Sparks. So you're going to click this Filters button, click Affinity Bonus. I have it on Descending because then I see their highest affinity first and their lowest affinity at the bottom. What does this mean, this circle? Well, this means that your Uma has good affinity with the parent Uma, with this inspirational Umamusume, who's going to guide them on their journey. So for the purposes of teaching, we're going to select 2 Umas. If I scroll really far down, I can get single circle affinity with 2 Umas. This is average. This is probably, if you're just starting out, what your affinity is going to look like. You're going to see this single circle here. Well, what does that mean, right? So if we come back to Uma School, you're going to see that a single circle means your Umamusume has anywhere between 50 to 150 affinity. So when you're trying to do this, you are trying to get the highest affinity that you possibly can. The higher your affinity, the higher chance that your inheritance sparks will proc. What is an inheritance spark, you ask? Inheritance sparks are the things that the parent Umas learn at the end of their career. So you're going to see these Umas have, at the end of their career, a sort of spark moment where they now have learned skills that they're going to pass on. So what are sparks? If you select your Uma and then go to inspiration, you'll see the sparks that they can pass on to the Uma that they're inspiring. In this case, it's our Silent Suzuka. So this Mihono Bourbon, at the end of her career, she learned all of these sparks. Groundwork, URA Finale, 3-star stamina. This is a very strong parent. I love this parent. She also has 2 grandparents, and all of their sparks will also proc at a lower rate, a lower percentage chance to proc. So if you have single circle affinity, and we go back over to Uma School, this means that you have the chance to spark a percentage more or less. Single can be a buff, or it can be a debuff. Anything over 100 is going to buff your chance to inherit those sparks because it's going to be 1 point whatever. Maybe if you have 110, it's going to be 1.1 times. If you have 100 affinity, it's going to have no effect because it's just going to be 1 time. It's going to multiply by 1, which we all know is just the number, right? So if your affinity is exactly 100, it's going to have 0 effect on your Uma's chance to spark. So that means it's going to be the base chance to spark. We look at the global reference document for these base chances, and if you scroll down, the base chance of inheriting things is here. Affinity, they do a pretty great breakdown here, right? They do a pretty good basic breakdown on this chart as well. So you'll want to check this chart, but the most important thing to remember is that this is a multiplier, right? This is a multiplier. So your affinity, if it is above 100, is going to give you a buff. You want your affinity to be above 100. However, circle affinity encompasses 50 to 150. So if you have 0.9, if you have 90 affinity, if you're here, you actually have a chance to debuff yourself. It will be a 0.1 debuff, right? It will make your chances of sparking less. So you need to use a certain tool to calculate your affinity. The game will never tell you these numbers, right? The game will never say you have 60 affinity, you have 187. The game won't tell you. So you have to go to Game Tora. This website will calculate your affinity at base. So if let's plug in our example. We're going to plug in our Silent Suzuka. And just a side note, the alternative costumes do not change their affinity whatsoever. It's just a different costume. It technically counts as the same character. So we won't see Wedding Air Groove here. We're just going to see Air Groove. And as you can see, it's calculating our affinity as we go. We have passed already the 100 mark. Hooray! We love to see it, but we still have 2 more grandparents to input. So we're going to swap ourselves back to the game. Double check who this is. Daiwa and Saiyan Sky. Glorious. Then we go back here. We put Daiwa. Bang. And Saiyan Sky again. Bang. And that gives us 137 base affinity. This calculator obviously does not know what your specific Umas are, right? Like it doesn't know your air groove. It just knows air groove. So this is just calculating the base affinity that the Umas have with each other, programmed into the game. Every combination of these Umas will have this affinity with Silent Suzuka or more. There's no way to get less than 137 with this combination. This is their base affinity. How do you get more affinity, you ask? Every G1 race that you win gives you +1 affinity. Currently, G2s and G3s count as well, but eventually they patch that out. So you don't want to be doing parent runs with G2s and G3s because it's going to go away. And then it will apply retroactively, and that means that those Umas will no longer be as good. So you want to be doing G1s on your parent runs. Every G1 gives +1. We love to see it. So we know right now, if we go back and we look at our parents, we're still at single circle. And we know the threshold to go from single circle to double circle is 150. But we know we're at 137. So we know even with the G1s that these Umas have won, they haven't won enough to get us all the way up to 150. They haven't, between all of them, won 13 G1s that match. So this is not a good affinity in a sense. This is fairly low. However, it's not negative. So if we look at Uma School, anything above 100 is good. We are still getting 1.37 of a buff. Why? Because we have 137 affinity, which we calculated here. We are probably getting 138, 139. You can still use this. It is still, albeit small, a buff chance to your sparks proccing. We know from this document that you have about a 2 to 5% chance to inherit a skill. And this buff will affect that. So it'll go from 2 to 5% to 3 to 6%, which isn't a lot. But again, we're only at single circle. We're only at 137. Now, the whole reason everyone tells you to avoid triangle is because that's where it starts to be a really big debuff, right? You never want to run a parent with triangle or an Uma career with triangle affinity because it's going to be a 0.5 debuff or more. If you have 40 affinity or 30, you're looking at like a 0.8, 0.9 debuff. That's almost one time. It's a half to one time less. So now you've gone from the standard, if you're affecting nothing, if you have 100 affinity, the standard chance we know is somewhere around 2 to 5%. And if you debuff that by 50, this 0.5 here, you're now looking at 1 to 2.5%. And that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. You're probably not going to be sparking anything. And that's when you're going to start to see that some of your sparks, like your speed and your stamina, that normally just show up for you, won't pop, and you'll get less stats than it even showed you were getting in the game. The most important thing is to make sure that you are over 100. And the only way to do that is to either hit double circle affinity in the game or check on the affinity calculator on Game Tora, right? You have to be, this is the important line. This one right here. Now that you understand how affinity works, having 149 is just as good. And we talked about this before. And a lot of people on my short were asking me, okay, I get it. 149 is as good as 150, but why? How does it work? The reason is that you are getting this buff, right? So if 150 is a 1.5 times buff, 149 is a 1.49 times buff. That is 0.01% away from 150. It is insignificant. Getting from circle to double circle, not nearly as important as getting over 100 and knowing how much you're getting. Where it starts to get absolutely cracked is once you're in double circle, especially if you can hit 200, because then you're getting double the chance for sparks. And if you're hitting 200 affinity, then you are going to start to see a crazy amount of sparks, because what went from a 2 to 5 times chance, right? We talked about this the base percentage chance to inherit during an inspiration event. You go from this to 4 to 10, which is huge. A 10% chance across all those sparks. When you think about how many sparks you can have on a parent, you can often end up with parents that have a lot of sparks. That's why having high affinity is so good. And that's why you want to be really aiming for above 150, because the buff gets better and better. Very important to note, there is no upper limit to affinity. There's no upper limit. You can have 200, you could have 250. I don't know how you would ever do it, but you could have 400. You could go crazy, right? You could just end up with insane amounts of affinity. Obviously, it's limited by how much you can actually get in the game, because the Umas have a certain base affinity with each other, and then you can only increase it by winning G1 races. So there is an upper limit in that sense, but there's no programmed limit. It doesn't stop. You can't hit a programmed ceiling. You can only hit a ceiling of, I've won every possible G1, and all of my Uma's grandparents and parents have all won every single G1, and thus we've added 40 or 50 or 100 affinity on top of our base affinity. So the max you're ever going to see is most likely to be around 200 to 250, right? But there is no programmed max. So, whoops, see how far you can get. And that's affinity. That's how it works. So if you have any questions, comment below and we will answer them.